Bible tells us that the role of the Jew is to facilitate the salvation of the non-Jew. The Jews are also called a Goy because a Goy simply means a nation. The church fathers were all, without exception, deeply anti-Semitic.
Who is responsible for killing Jesus? Let's get that one off the way.
The Christian Bible portrays the Jews as uniquely responsible for killing Jesus, and Pontius Pilate and the Roman Empire are exonerated completely.
Rabbi, can you break down this term Goy and the Goyim? At least on Twitter, it's been circulating so much. And there are these Twitter fights online saying that, Jewish supremacy exists, that there's the Jew, there's the non-Jew, and the non-Jew is seen as a Goy, which they believe is a negative term, that they're second class, and that our Talmud teaches, we're not allowed to steal from one another, but we can steal from a Goy, and how we treat a Jew and how we treat a non-Jew, there's different standards, and that we can get away with, I guess, doing harm to a non-Jew, a Goy, because they are a Goy.
As it turns out, the Jews are also called a Goy because a Goy simply means a nation. That's all it means. Goy means a nation. Now, in Talmudic literature, there are laws that apply to people who are idol worshippers or people that are your enemies. And then the people who are really bad faith actors switch the word for your enemies or idol worshippers and to Christian or Gentile or Goy and go, aha, you see, so there's a game, there's a scam that's going on. And the scam is frankly performed by people who are bad faith actors. One of the striking things about the Jew is that we are here to serve the non-Jews. We are here to facilitate their salvation. In fact, I mention this often, the Bible tells us that the role of the Jew is to facilitate the salvation of the non-Jew, and the non-Jews will come to us. Arise and shine, for your light is come. Kings will go by your light, Isaiah chapter 61. So there's a game that's played. Also, one other point is just, I'll cover this very quickly. There's a difference, much in the Talmud, is about what either proscription or prescription, and those things are conflated. And I think that should be explained just for a moment. If a cop is walking down the street and he sees someone, and I don't like that guy, I don't like the color of his skin, he looks suspicious, and he just breaks into his house without a warrant, without any probable cause, without anything, and lo and behold, finds a kilo of heroin in the living room. Well, that's actually happened many times.
Right.
And courts will throw away that evidence because the Constitution makes it clear that you can't have a unlawful search and seizure, so it's thrown out. That does not mean that American law says that you can have a kilo of heroin in your living room. It's just saying that the courts can't act upon that evidence. So it's proscribing, is preventing the courts from acting upon that evidence. That does not mean that it's a good thing. So there's all kinds of games that are played with Jewish law, as you could with American law, and that is weaponized and exploited by people who hate us. The word Goy means a nation. It doesn't mean anything bad or good. As I say, the Jews are in Exodus 19, we are called a Goy, a Mamleches Kohanim, a Goy Kadosh. That's talking about the Jews. So that's not negative at all. We're here to facilitate the salvation of the world. A great question.
Rabbi, how would you describe the Talmud? As I've been speaking about it, I want to speak about it with more defense. I find that sometimes Jews, at least those of us in the influencer space, advocacy space, and those of us who are religious, we're like, oh, like yeah, people study Gemara, but like our halacha doesn't really come from there. There's not something like we necessarily just follow from the Talmud. It's the rabbis discussing ideas and, debating certain things, but we have other books that no one else knows about, like Shulchan Aruch, that like, we follow in terms of how to live our everyday life and things like this. However, I did read this tweet from a rabbi, I forget his name. It's leaving me now, but he said, "Listen, like we should be able to defend our Talmud, and we don't need to water it down to make other people feel comfortable, and we don't need to say these type of sentences like, oh, well, there's nothing that we really follow from there, etc." And so that had me thinking about how I should be defending the Talmud and talking about the Talmud. So, how would you describe the Talmud as, an important book in literature in our faith?
Right. So the Talmud, with more than 70 volumes, is the largest piece of literature from the ancient world. And Talmud contains many things. It contains oral Torah, but it also contains discussions among judges about what is the extent of the law.
Right,
If a man marries a woman, he has to give her something of value according to the Torah, but well, how much value? What's the minimum required value? Now, people are studying constitutional law or they're studying American law. They not only when a Supreme Court when there's a majority opinion, scholars of law not only look at the opinion of the majority rule, but they also study the opinion of the minority rule, right? And from that, you can extrapolate a lot of information. Well, in the same way, in the Talmud, where there, when you marry a woman, could you marry a woman? I'm transposing currency here. Is the minimum amount a dollar or a penny? Well, it's something, but that's where the argument emerges. So we're studying the majority opinion, the consensus opinion. After all, we're told in the Torah to follow the majority, right? Told
right,
openly. So if we're supposed to follow the majority of a court, that's why a court always has a odd number of judges sitting on the court. So if we follow the majority, well, we know that people have to discuss it, go back and forth on it, but we also want to know what was behind the minority opinion. That's all recorded in the Talmud as well. It's the problem with the Talmud for people who are not thoroughly engaged in it. It's not just that it's written in Aramaic, a language that very few people are familiar with, but it's written in a way that's very terse, where it uses very few words and many ideas are just implied. I don't know if you've ever done this, where you're watching a YouTube class on theoretical physics at Yale University, right? Well, you could do that, right? You go on
yeah,
YouTube,
I
you've
do
done
that in my
this.
spare time, Rabbi.
You do that, right? You go on MIT, you can a class on nuclear physics, on nuclear chemistry, excuse me, theoretical physics. Try this out, right? Theoretical physics at Cambridge University. You can watch these classes, no charge, YouTube. Okay. Now, what's going to happen within 10 seconds of the professor's presentation to his very bright audience? These are all the smartest kids in the world. Well, what happens is within 5 seconds, we have no clue what he's talking about.
Right.
Because it is implied that if you got into MIT somehow and you're taking that, all these things, and the president doesn't have to spell it out. And therefore, a lot of ideas are just missing in those classes because if you got into this class, then for sure you know what the professor is talking about. And that's why, like Art Scroll, when they translated Talmud, what made their translation so unique and novel is they actually insert the missing thoughts in the Talmud. The Talmud just says something. In Tanakh, also, we very frequently have just a very simple thought, but all the ideas are left out and we have to fill it in. And that's why we have so many commentaries. The Talmud supplies all that information, but that's why there are thousands of commentaries on it, because we really cherish Torah. We want to understand the majority opinion, the minority opinion. What are they differing over? What is their disagreement over? And that's very interesting to people who really love Torah and want to learn as much as possible from these sacred texts.
Why have you? Can we just dispel some of the things that they say are in the Talmud? One being that you can marry a girl off at 3 years old.
It's all stupid nonsense, but maybe I should raise the conversation up a little bit. The Talmud is not saying that at all. The Talmud is stating a point, a medical point, and that is if a girl who's under 3 years old, if she is raped, so her hymen really will regenerate. And
Mm.
this finger of mine, I've never said this publicly. When I was a little boy, this finger was chopped off in a
Oh,
terrible,
wow.
terrible accident. And I'm very grateful I don't remember it. My mother reminds me of this story a few times a year. To her horror, my finger got caught in the inside of a door. It was slammed closed, and it was just hanging by a piece of skin. My mother just held the two parts together in a hand, went to the hospital, and they sewed it up. You could very vaguely see it there, but my finger regenerated, rebuilt itself because I was that young. Okay.
Mm.
So the Talmud is not saying, it's like the example of having a kilo of Coke in your trunk, but the cop did an illegal search. The Talmud not saying the Talmud is the source of the greatest modesty, and women are held up to the greatest state. The true rabbis of the Jewish people are the women who are the
Mm.
leaders of the Jewish home. Remember, a synagogue is not mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures, but a Jewish home is. And it's the mother of the Jewish home that's the leader of the Jewish nation. Without the Jewish woman, the Jewish people would not be here any longer. The greatest respect and dignity and modesty and integrity for the Jewish family is found in Jewish literature. The Talmud, however, is just discussing a medical point. So the Talmud says that if a girl under 3 years old, if she is penetrated, and I'm going to have to answer you very directly,
Right.
it's like one sticks a finger in the eye, which means nothing has happened, which means just as if someone we've all poked our eye, and I did that last night in my sleep. I woke up, this eye was sore. I don't think you could see it any longer. But but I put Visine in my eye, and I was worried, oh, I'm doing this interview. I hope this eye will get better. And it has gotten completely better. So at first it was irritated, but then my eye healed itself. Because there's all kinds of wonderful things that go on in the eye and tears and so on. So Talmud is simply stating a medical fact that the hymen of a girl under 3 regenerates. That's all. It's not saying it's okay to have intercourse with a 3-year-old. That's insane. It's simply
Yes.
stating a fact that that girl has a status of a complete virgin. So then our good friends in the Ku Klux Klan who love us so much go, the Talmud endorses having sex with girls up to 3 years old. In fact, that's the language of Talmud, that if a girl under 3 is violated, it's like sticking a finger in the eye. What does that mean? It means that just as that baby's body repairs itself, the eye repairs itself. That's all it's saying there. But of course, if you happen to, work for the neo-Nazis, so then you weaponize this kind of garbage, and that's what it is, filth. And your viewers probably want to throw up right now because this is
Right. It's
repulsive.
disgusting.
But what they're doing is they're taking stuff out of context and eisegesis. They're mistranslating what it says. They're stripping the passage. And therefore, if you want to hate people, if you want to get people to hate a minority, it's really very easy. Okay. If you I want to give a class on how to create bigots. If you simply say to people, black people are bad, people go, what are you, stupid? Don't do that. That's not how you create bigots. I'll tell you how to do it if you want to make bigots. You tell stories about them, but
Mm.
what you do is you simply cull and carefully tell only the stories that are embarrassing to Israel and ignore all those stories that make Israel look good. You just dump them. That's what the media is doing. You want to make people hate black people. It's so easy to create a bigot. All you do is just say all the things that are embarrassing to the black community and ignore all the great stuff. And bingo, it's through storytelling. And tragically, that's what's happened in the Gospels. There's a reason, Ashira, that that Christian countries were unsafe places for Jews during World War II, and Hindu and Buddhist countries and China and Japan were safe places for Jews, is because of the storytelling. Storytelling
Mm,
creates the bigotry. People don't want to just hate the Koreans. Why should I hate them? But you tell stories that, look, I worked in the news for Channel 7 here in Israel, right? So you have news stories, right? Like you have
right,
100 stories about Israel every day. I'm making up that number, right?
right,
So what the anti-Israel media does is, so 5 stories are embarrassing to Israel and 95 stories make Israel look really good, right? But what you
right.
do is, what our good friends at Al Jazeera do, what do they do is, they don't have to even lie. They just find that one crazy, insane story that's very embarrassing and subvert all the other stuff. And bingo, you have created your narrative. You don't have to lie. Just rip stuff out of context and that's what our good friends are doing. And that's how
Rabbi,
you
what
make bigotry. Tell
Rabbi,
stories.
what is this term that I've been seeing pop up where they talk about in the New Testament, woe to the people who say they are Jews, but in fact they are imposters and they're coming from the synagogue of Satan. Where does this
Yeah.
idea come from?
Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, and chapter 3, verse 9. And it really is there. And I want to make it very clear. If you're looking for anti Semitic statements in the Christian Bible, you will find it. You will have
Mm,
no trouble finding it. However, if you like Jews, you could find a few statements in the Christian Bible that are favorable towards Jews. However, I would be dishonest with you if I told you that there were way more anti-Semitic ideas in the Christian Bible than pro-Jewish ideas. The Jews are uh, described in a villainous way, and in the book of Revelation, that's the last book in the Christian Bible, the Jews are not portrayed well. They're portrayed as enemies of the church, and they're not the real chosen people. They're enemies of God. It says, I mean, even Paul says that in 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 14 through 16. Even they are the Jews who killed Jesus and are contrary to all mankind. The Christian Bible calls the Jews the the seed of the devil in John 8:44. I wish I can tell you that it isn't there and people made it up, but the church fathers were all, without exception, deeply anti Semitic. The reformers were deeply anti Semitic. I would like to tell you they're taking passages out of context. They're not. The Christian
mm.
Bible portrays the Jews as uniquely responsible for killing Jesus, and Pontius Pilate and the Roman Empire are exonerated completely. And in fact,
Who is
I mean,
responsible for killing Jesus? Let's get that one off the way.
right. So crucifixion was a uniquely Roman way of executing uh, people who committed acts of treason in the empire. So there's no disagreement that the Romans did it. But what you find in the Gospels and in the letters of Paul explicitly is that the Jews were completely behind it. They control the world, they control governments. We control Trump, the I mean, that's what's going on here. It's this being replayed. And the Jews say to Pontius Pilate in Matthew 25, where you have the crucifixion scene, the passion narrative, where Pontius Pilate and his wife are saying this guy is innocent. And the Jews going, crucify him, crucify him. In verse 27, we take his death upon ourselves and our children forever. It says
Mm,
that in the Christian Bible. So I would like to tell Christians that it's not in the New Testament at all and just a bunch of neo Nazis. No, these ideas are explicitly in the Christian Bible. And there are many Christians who love Jews and love Israel, who are very pro Jewish. And
Were there
frankly,
Jews at the time that wanted the crucifixion of Jesus to happen?
we don't have any non-Christian documents that are contemporaneous. So, but it doesn't make any sense. The Jews had bigger problems, meaning like the Roman Empire, that were
Mhm.
persecuting Jews, that were bringing idols on the Temple Mount. The Jews didn't have an interest in persecuting Christians. And certainly Paul wasn't sent to Damascus on behest of the high priest. Like the high priest had no authority over Damascus, and Christians were the least of our problems. And frankly, in the letters of Paul, we see that Paul is battling fellow Christians all the time. The Jews had no interest in any of this, but it was very important in the New Testament to make sure that the Roman Empire is completely exonerated, and the Jews are the people who are responsible, completely culpable for killing Jesus. And it says that in the Christian Bible explicitly. In fact, in
Mm.
a conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate in John 19:11, Jesus says it to Pontius Pilate, you didn't do anything. It's those who gave me over to you that are responsible. Now, these are not historical. And one other point I want to convey, if you look at the Gospels chronologically, meaning Mark first, John last, that's not how it appears in the New Testament. That's chronologically Mark is earliest. Mark is the least anti-Jewish of the four Gospels. I discuss this in my book, Let's Get Biblical. It's not pro-Jewish, but it's the least anti-Jewish of the four, and John is the most anti-Jewish of the four. Where basically Jews are given Jesus to be taken away to crucify. So the Jews are worse in John. So we could see the anti-Semitism in the Christian Bible growing, and the culpability of the Jews growing, and the Pontius Pilate is further exonerated as we go later on in the New Testament. I'm so happy that the Gospel of Peter, which didn't make it into the canon, it's later than the Gospels that are canonized, because that's even more anti-Semitic than the canonical Gospels. But as the church moves further, it becomes increasingly more anti-Jewish, to the point that after the Council of Nicaea in 326, the Jews are expelled from Jerusalem. No Jew is allowed to be here during Constantine's reign, until a Roman emperor 35 years later, named Julian, who is not a Christian. He says, "Oh, you can come back and go build a temple." So the Christian
Mm.
Bible is loaded with anti-Semitism. It really is there. And now there are millions of Christians that love Jews who are not anti-Semitic, who would know what anti-Semitism is. And what they have to do essentially is say that, look, whoever did that, it was those Jews of that time, but it has nothing to do with Jews of today. So you do have people like, America's Secretary of State Rubio, and you
Mark
have,
Rubio.
yeah, and you have the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So the way they would respond, and these people really, really love Israel, they're very supportive of Israel. What they would say is those were Jews of that time. They wouldn't say these verses that Rabbi Singer is saying don't exist. Rather, saying
Mm.
that's talking about just some Jewish leaders of that time. That has nothing to do with Jewish people today or in general, and are very pro-Israel. But they've got to work that all through. That's a little
Mm.
tedious. Whereas the Orthodox Church, which is very anti-Jewish, that's the Eastern Orthodox Church, they don't got to work out anything. It's very easy for them. So the Philo-Semitic Christians out there have to work out these texts, and they say, well, it doesn't mean Jews today. It meant a few Jews who were leaders, who were corrupt leaders. But the New Testament portrays that way. But all of this is nonsense. The Jews would have, Pontius Pilate was a cruel lunatic by every account. We have a lot of accounts of this. And he would not be interested in the Jewish opinion on if someone should be crucified. The idea that anybody should be released on the Jewish holidays, this is completely ahistorical, never happened. The Christian Bible, unfortunately, contains a lot of this material that's designed to demonize the Jews and exonerate the Roman Empire, and that's unfortunate.
Rabbi, I know as Jews, we say, when Jesus' name is mentioned, we say, may his name be blotted out. And I've seen that there are, Christian influencers being attacked for supporting Israel because they say, well, look what the Talmud says about Jesus, that he's rolling around in hell and in feces, etc. And I tweeted something out like, listen, your guys' Bible doesn't say too many flattering things about Jews. We have our own ideas about Jesus, etc. I don't know why we have to pretend as if because we support or like each other or have allyship with one another that our books don't say something offensive about one or the other. Like, where do you stand with that?
I think that if Jews are looking for literature that speaks about us in a flattering way, we should not look to the works of the church fathers. Irenaeus, Ignatius, Augustine, they said the most horrific things about Jews.
Right.
So if I'm looking for flattering things about Jews from the ancient world, I would not look at the patristic fathers. They all, without exception, were violent, crazy anti-Semites. They were nuts. I mean,
Right.
and Luther, the leader of the Reformation, was a vile anti-Semite. Calvin, who never met a Jew in his life, said the most horrible things about Jews. So if I was looking for flattering things about Judaism or Jews, I wouldn't look there. And I think that Christians should not look at Jewish literature like the Talmud to find anything flattering about Christianity. We have
Right.
very significant disagreements. It's really crazy when Christians say there are things about Jesus in Talmudic literature that's unflattering. Like, why are you saying that? Like, why is this somehow a good for Christianity? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. What they're really saying is you can't say anything negative about our religion, while our literature could say the most horrible things about the Jews. And can't like, why is this a compliment? Why would a Christian share such a thing? That also, it's really silly. But moreover, the Jesus in the Talmud is likely not the Jesus of Christianity, in that the Yeshu in the Talmud is there are two individuals, one in the first century BCE, which is not when Jesus lived, who is a student of Rabbi Yeshua ben Parachia, a Tana, a sage that's a contributing author to the Mishnah. And
Mm-hmm.
there's another fellow in the second century, which means during the time of, let's say, Rabbi Akiva. So neither of them are lived during the time of the Jesus of Christianity. So you have a problem with that. But I would encourage this. If Jews are looking for flattering things said about Jews and Judaism, don't look at the writings of the reformers, of Bucer, Luther, Calvin. Don't look at Augustine, the most revered of all church fathers, John Chrysostom, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Athanasius. All of them were vile anti-Semites. Don't look for compliments. And conversely, don't look for things that are flattering about Christianity in Jewish literature. But as it turns out, there's a disputed issue about whether the Jesus in the Talmud is the same Jesus as Christianity. But if you look at the Talmud, the dating doesn't work for them, so it really doesn't support them. But
Mm.
why would, if the Talmud says something that's unflattering about Christianity, why is that why is that somehow a goal? That's why is that an endorsement of Christianity? I have no clue why. So really, what they're saying is our church fathers or our reformers could say any insane thing about the Jews, which they really were. I mean, Luther wrote books on the Jews. He said the most grotesque things about Jews, including burn down their synagogues, kill Jews. The most horrible things about Jews. He was a horrible person, a grotesque individual. Like, why doesn't that work? And it's because there's unequal weights and measurements here. But thankfully, there are very responsible Christians out there that recognize this very serious problem and want to discuss what we have in common, our shared values, rather than engage in this sophomoric discussion. And I'm very grateful Christians that are very thoughtful out there, and thank goodness they represent the majority rather than the lunatic fringe.